Morning, thanks for having me. I was outside boning up on my talk so I don't sound as demented as I actually am. So we're here, in Reno, going to Virginia City tomorrow, and it's so historic. Ann Collier, after me, she'll be talking about Julia Boulette, the most famous woman of Nevada, as far as I know. And when I found out we were doing this talk here, it occurred to me that a talk about, we were going to do this conference here, that a talk about the Verdi train robbery would be appropriate, because this was the first train robbery in the Wild West. It's been a common myth since I was a kid that Jesse James and his gang did the first train robbery at Adair, Iowa in 1873. And a lot of people, I think to this day, still believe it. But the first train robbery, or several, I believe, actually took place in the Civil War. I think one was in 1865, where guerrillas stopped trains in the Midwest somewhere. And for some reason, those aren't typically counted as train robberies because they were more acts of warfare. And then the Reno gang in the mid-1860s in Indiana pulled the first peacetime train robberies in the United States. But the first Western train robbery, the story of the holdup is going to sound fairly common. We've all read about how Butch Cassidy robbed trains, how Ben Kilpatrick got his brains knocked out at Sanderson Curve in Texas in 1912, way after what I'm going to talk about. But keep in mind that these guys actually invented this. They came up with this whole scheme on their own. And so when we take the bus tour tomorrow, we're going to be going through some of these places that I'm talking about. And so the Verdi robbery, like I said, was the first Western train robbery. Train robberies became more and more common gradually through the 1870s. The first California train robbery wasn't even until 1883 at Clipper Gap, which is, you can actually almost see it from Interstate 80 if you're driving from Reno to Sacramento. And so the Verdi robbery, like I said, was something that was really kind of the invention of this system, because in later years, between 1890 and 1901, there were 341 train holdups in the U.S. in which 99 men were killed. And so this was a huge problem. The railroad companies all employed their own police, special officers, detectives. Wells Fargo employed their detectives in the West. In the East Coast, Adams Express had their detectives. In the South, the Southern Express. And this is a nationwide problem, but especially in the West for obvious reasons, because it's remote. The nearest sheriff is often 100 miles away. It's easier to escape. And there's a lot more rowdy, drunk men with too many guns and too much testosterone in the Wild West, and too few women. As we all know, men generally behave themselves better if women are present. Thank you all for being here and keeping us in line. So, and actually, I won't ramble too much. Allen City is going to drag me off with a hook when I've got 5 minutes left. So, and I'm not checking my messages. I'm just checking my time so I don't blow it. Train robbery gradually developed, and even the robbers, I don't know if it was, I don't remember who invented this. Maybe somebody else will remember. But the so-called trestle method was one of the ways that the robbers gradually developed these methods of robbing trains and stopping trains. So the typical thing we know from Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, one of them would sneak onto the train or buy a ticket, climb over, and the trains generally had, and the train I'm going to talk about, Central Pacific number 1, a famous train, the first train to go across the Central Pacific, which was completed in 1869 from the Oakland Mole, which was the transit center in the East Bay, because you couldn't get a train across the San Francisco Bay at that point. So travelers would take a ferry from the ferry building, still there, to the ferry building in Oakland, get to the Oakland Mole by a short cable car ride or whatever, streetcar ride, and then they take the train all the way across the country. And so Chinese laborers, as so many of you know, were brought to the U.S. They constructed, they became experts at using dynamite, building tunnels. They later were employed as miners because they gained all this experience building the railroad. And then Irish laborers built the Union Pacific coming from the east, and they met at Promontory Point in Utah and had the huge, in 2019, we had the, my math is terrible, what is that, the 150th anniversary of the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad. So train robbery, as I said, got gradually developed. One of the problems is most men, not all, but most carried guns. The reason is there was very little law enforcement in most frontier communities, so every man was responsible for his own self-defense. But not always. In many of the stage robberies, it's surprising, only 1 of 12 passengers has a pistol. So that happened quite a bit. So it's kind of not true that every single man carried a pistol all the time. What happened was the passengers, the armed passengers, would open fire on the train robbers. So typically what they do is, as I started to say, the engine obviously is first in the train. Behind that is the coal tender, which held the coal or the wood or whatever they were using as fuel. And then after that is the express car. In the West, it was always the Wells Fargo express car. And then following that would be anywhere from 2 to 3 or 4 passenger cars, and typically the smoker car, where the men could smoke and gamble, was in the back of the train. And so what happened in a number of train robberies is that the armed passengers would open fire on, or get off the train and have a gun battle with the train robbers. And so the robbers adapt to this stuff, so they came up with the trestle method, where they'd stop a train and just had the engine, the coal tender, and the express car on ground. The passenger cars are all on a trestle, so if any of the passengers got out, they'd fall into a canyon, so it kept the passengers out of it. But the other system, which I'm going to talk about here, was, like I said, the invention of train robbery, really, in the American West. So the leader of this whole thing that I'm going to talk about is a guy named Andrew Jackson Davis, commonly known as Big Jack Davis. And I don't know if you can make out here, but this is Big Jack Davis right here in the middle. Can you guys read their names appear underneath? Is that too small there?
Louder, John.
Can you guys, are you able to read their names on this thing? You can't see it. So this is Big Jack Davis here. And this is a really kind of an interesting early albumin, probably what we call a mammoth print or something like that, but it's a contemporary image put together of the gang. And this is very unusual because so many of these early crimes that happened before the 1870s, we don't have photographs of any of these people. My new book is about Joaquin Murrieta, and we have, thank goodness, we have a wood engraving of his severed head, kind of, but without all the grisly details, thankfully. But very, very unusual to have photographs that early. When you get into the 1890s, then it's much more common to have photographs of these Western outlaws. So this was a group of carte de visite images that a photographer put. They had it was probably sold as a souvenir, and it was an early wood engraving of the Central Pacific train, the horses near it, which I'll talk about, and then the entire gang, including, well, up at the top, I'll talk about that in a minute. So Big Jack Davis is bottom center, and he was the leader of the gang. And we don't really know much about him. He came out west in the 1850s in the gold rush. He became a miner. In the discovery of silver in what's called the Comstock lode, Virginia City, 1859, the Comstock rush occurred, and was one of the many, many, as we all know, the mining rushes in the Wild West. He owned a what's called a stamp mill, which is used to crush gold ore in 6 Mile Canyon, which is just outside, a few miles outside of Virginia City. And then he became the mining recorder, which is sort of like today you have a county recorder that records deeds and whatnot. He was the official recorder for the Virginia City area of mining claims. And so he was very respectable and also very intelligent. He had his stamp mill, like I said, and everybody, he's just a popular guy. But at some point, I think he realized with mining, it's like gambling, you don't really have a steady income. So in 1865, he put together a gang, and in 6 Mile Canyon, near Virginia City, it's just a couple miles east of the town, which we'll be at tomorrow, he and these other guys that he had recruited, they held up a stage. They got $1,000. You multiply by 30 or 40, so you're talking like 30, 40,000 in today's money. And they escaped, and nobody suspected them. And so then they, like all robbers, they don't bury the money like the treasure hunters wish. They spend it on booze and women and gambling, And so a year later, they're obviously out of money. So he and 3 of his gang hold up a stage on the Geiger Grade. And the Geiger Grade is what we're going to take tomorrow on the bus tour up to Virginia City. And up at the top of the grade is Geiger Summit. And so again, I might be preaching to the choir here, but if you watch the John Wayne movies or whatever, the Outlaws or the Indians or whatever, they pursue the stage. And, instead of shooting the horses, that would be no good. They have a big running gun battle, and no stage was ever robbed like that. There was never a running fight with stage robbers. The robbers would get at the top of the grade where the horses were exhausted. They were moving very slowly. Then they'd step out in front and, say, throw down the box. And those are kind of the time-honored command. Black Bart did it 33 times. He was the most prolific stage robber. But this, and just briefly, the first stage robbery in California was 1856. So stage robbery by the 1860s is still, it's not, it's common by this time. It's still kind of a novelty, but it's really not that unusual. So they escape, nobody suspects them. A year later, Big Jack Davis and 3 others of his gang, this is when they stopped the stage at Geiger Summit. I asked Alan if he thought that we could get the buses to stop there at the approximate location, but Alan thinks they probably aren't allowed to do that. But at least when we get up to the top of the grade, you'll have an idea of where they robbed this stage. And they made off. They blew up the Wells Fargo box with gunpowder, which is kind of unusual. That was one of the earliest times that was done. They took $5,000, and Wells Fargo offered a $9,000 reward, which is very unusual because as stage robbery got more and more common in the 1870s, their standard reward went down to $250. So $9,000, that was a major reward for that era. Nothing happened for 2 years, and then in 1868, Big Jack Davis and his gang robbed a Wells Fargo shipment on a stagecoach in 6 Mile Canyon, again on the other side of Virginia City. And at this point, the stage driver thought he recognized the voices of several of the robbers, and they should, because Davis's stamp mill was very close to, it's kind of dumb to pull a stage robbery right near where your business is, but that's what he did. And then 2 of the passengers thought they recognized Big Jack Davis and another member of the gang named Jay Davis, and John Squires was the other member of the gang. And the problem was, at the time of the court hearing, the preliminary hearing, they weren't sure, so the judge released both of them. But at this point, then they became major suspects. Then about a year and a half later, in the summer of 1870, Davis, and another of the gang, Tilton Cockerell, and these guys are all here. So Cockerell is, where is he? Cockerell is on the right, lower right, next to the railroad train. And then Squires, they call him Squeers, but that's not correct. He's next to Davis, bottom left. And so they, what they do is, a little bit different, they drop a telegraph pole across the stage road. They stop the stage, they rob the they open the Wells Fargo box, but it's empty. So they line up all the passengers, rob them all, and ironically, one of them is a guy named James Slingerman, who was the lieutenant governor of of Nevada, and also the warden of Carson, the state prison in Carson City. So this is a pretty big embarrassment for this major honcho to be robbed by this outlaw gang. And then they do another holdup, again, 6 miles south of Reno, and they also steal the contents of the Wells Fargo box. So they've robbed, at this point, 5 or 6 stagecoaches. And at this point, Davis starts planning the first train robbery in the West. And what he does is he sends, and this is so really remarkable for this era, because he uses the railroad and the telegraph line. He uses a secret code, which I'll talk about. So he sends one of the gang, John Chapman, who I think one of the gang isn't on the picture. Oh no, Chapman is wearing the hat on the right lower image. He sends him to San Francisco, and his instructions are to find out when a big gold shipment or a cash shipment is going to be sent on the railroad train. And how he does it, nobody knows, but he probably went out and got some of the express guys drunk or something, or went to the bar they hung out, or got a hooker, which is typical. The police use the prostitutes as informants, and the bad guys would also use the prostitutes as informants to find stuff out. So however he did it, he finds out that there's going to be a $60,000 shipment sent to the Yellow Jacket mine in Virginia City. This is a payroll. And so, and it's probably for quite a few months. They don't do this every month, obviously. This is a rare occasion that they're sending this much money to Virginia City. So Davis and his gang, they hole up in an abandoned mine tunnel in the mountains just north of Verdi. And so for any of you folks who have driven from Reno up to Truckee or to Lake Tahoe, you drive right through Verdi. It used to be my favorite place because for years, the Bonnie and Clyde death car, there's 3 death cars, 2 are fakes, but this is the real one, all full of the bullet holes from Frank Hamer's posse. And it was on display there for years because the guy that owns the little store, gas station, and casino right on the border owns the death car. And it basically, and he also owns the little store and casino at Primm, Nevada, which is on the highway from LA to Las Vegas. So if you cross into Nevada, they used to have a big billboard, the Bonnie and Clyde death car. I don't know if that's there anymore. But basically, he keeps the death car down in Primm for 10 years, and he sent it up here for 10 years. And of course, why my wife stayed married to me, I don't know. I have a sister in Reno. Every time I would make her stop to see, so I could drool over the death car every time we drove by. It's back down in Primm, Nevada now. But anyway, this is Verdi. There's not really that much there today. But what happens is they're holed up in an abandoned mine tunnel. One of the gang is in Reno, and he gets this telegram, and they've been waiting for days to get a telegram from Chapman in San Francisco. And it says, the telegram says, "We'll send you $60, signed Joseph Enrique." And this is code for there's $60,000 coming on the train. And so this train, Central Pacific number 1, it leaves Oakland on November 4, 1870. and it's got the payroll on board. Wells Fargo, only one messenger is guarding this huge treasure. And so Big Jack Davis is with John Squires, who I mentioned, and these other desperados, C.B. Parsons, Tilton Cockerill, and James Gilchrist. And what they do is they go down, when they kind of time it. The train gets delayed due to a train accident. But finally, the train arrives in Verdi about midnight. And so the gang, what they do is, as the typical thing, and Butch Cassidy, apologies to Mike Bell, but Butch Cassidy didn't invent having the guy holding the horses, right? But they have one of the gang is about 4 miles down the grade from Verdi with the horses. The rest of the gang has hoofed it up, or somehow they got into Verdi. The train stops there for oil or wood, whatever. My friend Don Gordon is here. He's the Central Pacific expert. He'd have to tell us what the heck they were using to power the engine, because I have no clue. But in any event, the train stopped. They all clamber aboard. And then they just do the classic thing, which became the hallmark of American train robberies. They capture the conductor, a couple of them climb up on top, drop down into the coal tender, drop into the engine, cover the engineer and the fireman with their pistols, make them go down about 4 miles to right near, there's a little town of Mogul that's about 5 or 6 miles out of Reno toward California. And that's more or less where I've been trying to figure out exactly where the robbery happened, but more or less there, within a mile or so. And then they stop the train. They first, take that back, just out of Verdi, they stop the train, then they unhook, they force the train crew to unhook the passenger cars, because they already know we don't want armed passengers shooting at us. Unhook the passenger cars, then they lock up some of the train crew in one of the cars, and then they take off with just the engineer and the fireman, and the Wells Fargo messenger is inside the express car. When they get down to Mogul, they then order the Wells Fargo messenger to get out. He obeys, which he's really not supposed to. He's supposed to put up a fight, and this messenger does obey. They then break into the safe. They get $41,000 in gold coins. There's so much of that. The other 20,000 was apparently silver coins, which is way too heavy to carry. They leave all the silver and they just take the gold. They stuff it into a bunch of old boots, get on their horses, and this is the middle of the night. It's really cold and wintry. This is November, and they take off. And sounds like they've done an incredible job, right? Well, the local officers, and one of them is up here, George Downey. He's the chief of police of Reno. He's at top left. And he and a guy named Jim Kincaid, who was a famous lawman, he was undersheriff of Washoe County, which is Reno. They start a big manhunt, and they pretty much put the word out. The word goes pretty quickly about this train robbery. Well, 3 of the outlaws, and again, I tell this story when I used to be a cop, we'd always joke that thank God the crooks were really dumb, because we weren't much smarter than they were, and if they weren't really dumb, we'd have never been able to catch them, right? And so this is kind of what 3 of these guys do, is that Parsons, Gilchrist, and John Squires, they ride about 10 miles up toward Truckee to a place called Sardine Valley, and an innkeeper and his wife run a small rural hotel there. And what they do is they come in, 2 of them come in and book a room, and then Squires, I think it is, comes in a few hours later and they gets a room, and they pretend like they don't know each other. But the innkeeper's wife is kind of suspicious. They haven't heard about the train robbery yet. But she hears them talking in their rooms and thinks that's kind of odd, but then she doesn't pay any attention. But then in the morning, she's kind of suspicious about Squires. And at one point, he goes to the outhouse, and this is kind of odd because the outhouse has a knothole in it. And whether this knothole was there by accident or purpose, I do not know. But she gazes in through the knothole, because he's in there a while, and she sees him dumping gold coins out of a boot. And she realizes something's really bad here. So goes back, Squires gets on his horse, takes off. I think he was putting the coin in his saddlebags or something. And then her husband then doesn't have a horse for some reason. He walks like 8 miles or something until he finally comes across Kincaid, and I think Downey is the other officer, and tells them what they saw. And this is basically the beginning of the end. Because what happens is the officers, a massive manhunt, hundreds of men are looking. There's a huge reward. The amount of the $30,000 reward is offered, which is almost about $1 million in today's money. Just unbelievable. I don't know. I mean, Mike could answer this. Was there ever a $30,000 reward offered for any of the Butch Cassidy's bunch? Yeah. So this is like, no one's ever heard of a train robbery like this before. This is huge. And the reward was offered partly by Wells Fargo, partly by the state of Nevada, and largely by the bank that lost the money. And so what happens is, the short version is that these guys confess, they turn over the money, they name the other outlaws, and so they start rounding everybody up. And this is done by the detectives for the Southern Pacific and the local officers in Nevada and California. And they end up catching the entire gang. And of these gang members, they want mercy, and they know they're caught and there's nothing they can do about it. And this is very unusual. Of the $41,000 stolen, they returned all but $3,000. What happened to the other $3,000, nobody knows. And then they were all convicted, and Saul Jones, Tilton Cockerell, Parsons, and John Squires, who I pointed out here, each got about 20 years in the Nevada State Prison. Gilchrist and one over the gang, they turned state's evidence, testified against everybody, and were released without any prison time. And then Big Jack Davis, for reasons that are kind of unclear, one writer claims that he turned state's evidence, but I'm not sure that's right. In any event, he only got 10 years, and he's the guy that organized the whole thing. And it may be because of his political influence. So then the story gets even more bizarre, because less than a year later, the big break from the Nevada State Prison happens. And here, 29 convicts escape in a massive break. They kidnap, there's a different lieutenant governor at this point who is also the warden of the prison. Back then, the politicians, they made them work. I'm not sure if they do that anymore. But if you were lieutenant governor, you had to do your lieutenant governor stuff. I think Mark Twain's brother was lieutenant governor too later when he came out. And so the lieutenant governor also had to run the prison. So he lived at the prison, and then they had a warden, a deputy warden, and guards that did the actual work of guarding the prisoners. So they break out of the prison in this huge break. There's another massive manhunt. These guys flee across the Sierra. They kill an 18-year-old mail rider. They murder a Paiute Indian. Paiute Jack or something was his nickname. A posse pursues them. One of the leaders of the posse is a guy named Robert Morrison, local Wells Fargo agent. He's killed in a big gun battle. Finally, the gang is trapped at Convict Lake. So for any of you that go down to Bodie, if you continue about another hour down 395, Convict Lake, nobody goes to see it anymore. There's this kind of a small road that goes off. It's to the west side of 395. So if you're going southbound, on your right. And there's a popular movie back, I think in the 50s, somebody would correct me, and I think Burl Ives is in it. It's called Convict Lake, and it's a fictionalized story of the prison break, all the men in a little town of Convict Lake, which there wasn't any town there, it was just a lake. The men all take off on a manhunt, and then the outlaws come in and capture all the women, and it's how the women kind of outwit the outlaws, and I think it's in the mid-50s, something like that. It's not like a classic film, but it comes up on TV off and on. But anyway, that's what it's based on. And so eventually, the gang is captured. 3 of them are lynched because they were the ones that by the actual posse. And then, so what happens is Big Jack Davis, he refuses to take part in the break. He's only got 10 years. He gets pardoned by the governor after doing all these robberies and everything. And he's pardoned after serving only 4 years. In 1876, surprise, surprise, he robs a stagecoach from Eureka to Pioche in western Nevada. And it's guarded by Eugene Blair. I have my book on Wells Fargo messengers and detectives, and Blair was a famous Wells Fargo messenger. He opens fire on Big Jack Davis. Davis flees without getting any money. Then a year later, Davis stopped a stage near Eureka, Nevada. And at this point, I think I forgot one stage robbery. Anyway, he did a couple stage robberies. Then finally, he does another really well-organized stage holdup. And this is outside of Eureka, Nevada. And he has one of the gang, kind of like he did with the train robbery, one of the gang is in town, and he's going to notify them, and they go to Willow Station, which is like about 10 miles away. In between Eureka and Willow Station is a huge mountain. So the guy's job is, when a stage is leaving with a heavy shipment, he's supposed to go to the top of the mountain and light a fire, which shows that there's one messenger on the stage. If there's 2 messengers, then he's going to light 2 fires. Well, what happens is another messenger named Shotgun Jimmy Brown, he's one of the most famous Wells Fargo messengers ever. He's a buddy of Eugene Blair. They're both on the stage. This is the only stage robbery I've ever heard of where 2 top Wells Fargo messengers who've already been in multiple gun battles with outlaws have been guarding the stage. Well, the guy sees the gang member sees the stage leave, jumps on his horse, races all the way up to the top of the mountain, lights the 2 fires. But the problem is it's 10 miles away. So it looked like 1 fire instead of 2. So the stage pulls in, however long it takes a stage to go 10 miles, 3 or 4 hours, whatever, and pulls in. And all of a sudden a voice comes out of the darkness, Eugene Blair, surrender. And it's Big Jack Davis, and he's got one of the other gang members with him. They captured the station keeper and his family. They got them all locked up inside the station. They tied them up with ropes and everything. And then as Eugene Blair gets down from the stage, Davis rushes up to him and puts his shotgun. He first fired a blast with his shotgun and missed. Then he ran up to Eugene Blair and fired again, but he pulled the trigger of the barrel, double barrel shotgun, pulled the trigger of the barrel that he had already fired. And just as he did that, Shotgun Jimmy Brown leans over from the dickey seat, which is behind the seat behind the driver, and fires a blast of buckshot at pretty close range into Big Jack Davis. He lives for a few hours, and before he dies, he confesses, yeah, I was the guy that shot at you. We had that gunfight with Eugene Blair before. So that's the end of Big Jack Davis and the end of my talk. So if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Casey, yeah.
Who collected the reward?
The reward, I can't remember. When I was 19, I did this article in Nevada Highways and Parks magazine, and then it was published when I was 20, and they put this guy with a bicycle on the cover. I wish they'd have put a train robbery on the cover or something like that. So I researched this so many years ago, I can't remember. I think the local officers received the reward from what I understand, from what I can recall, but I'm not positive. I don't know, because sometimes these, as you know, the Wells Fargo was famous for paying rewards. But often businesses offered rewards and they wouldn't pay them, and there's a lot of litigation. You can still read court cases online from the 19th century of lawsuits over rewards and whether they were legitimate rewards or not. And in California, I'm getting off topic here, there's a penal code section that was enacted, I think, in the 1870s that made dead or alive rewards unlawful, because they used to have dead or alive rewards before that, and it's been illegal in California ever since. Anybody else? Thank you so much.